Alright, this video we're talking about a few things that, well, I wish I knew when I was starting photography, and just some mistakes a lot of beginner photographers make that you might be making too. So let's go through some of them and maybe you can learn something. I don't know. Before we get into this video, I just want to let you guys know that I have my Instagram, my TikTok, and my website. All my social media links, everything's down below if you want to stay updated or check out what I'm doing, anything like that, in the description. Also, if you enjoy these videos, please hit the like button and the subscribe button if you want to see some more. Alright, so beginner photographer mistakes. What are some things that you as a beginner photographer might be doing that is just making your photos not as good as they could be? Now I'll start this by saying I'm pretty much guilty of all of these. I've done every single one of these at some point, especially when I was just starting out, and I can't be the only one. If you guys can think of any mistakes that I didn't talk about in this video, leave them in the comments down below and I'll check it out. Alright, starting off with number 1. Not shooting RAW. So if you don't know what RAW is, it is a type of file format that your camera creates. By default, your camera is probably shooting in JPEG, which is fine, it still produces nice images, but it doesn't have as much information as a RAW file, and you can't edit it nearly as well as you could a RAW file. RAW files basically contain all of the information from that image, like the color temperature, the exposure, and by saving all that information, it allows you later on when you're editing to drastically change those settings and still end up with a usable photo. But if you're shooting JPEG, you have a lot smaller file size, which is good if you don't have a lot of storage or maybe you're not even editing your photos, but it means that the JPEG isn't saving as much information. To demonstrate this, here is an overexposed photo. Now these photos are exactly the same, and I'm going to do the exact same edits to both of them, except one of them is a RAW file and one of them is a JPEG. Now notice how much detail is still saved in that RAW file after I make the adjustment compared to a JPEG. Same goes for color balance. If you shoot and you accidentally mess up and get the wrong color temperature of your photo when it's really blue or it's really yellow, you can completely change that after the fact while editing, whereas with a JPEG you can change a little bit, but if you change it a lot, it just doesn't look normal anymore. Another nice thing about RAW files is you can come back to it years later and re-edit it with your new editing style, with the new knowledge you've learned, and come up with a much better photo than you could have done before, whereas if you're just shooting your JPEGs and saving them, there's not much you can do to them again. Alright, next mistake that I made when I was starting photography and that a lot of people make is overexposing or underexposing your photos. For example, this is what an underexposed image looks like. It is way too dark for the lighting, and this is what an overexposed image looks like, where it's way too bright for the lighting in your scenario. So especially when you're first starting out, this is a tricky thing to get right every time, and it'll just come naturally over time, but having a correctly exposed image makes such a difference in just the details you get out of the image and the overall skin tones, and not everyone's going to notice if it's a little underexposed or overexposed, but if you want to come off as professional as possible with your images, you need that exposure to be right on. And I don't necessarily have a tip for fixing this other than learn to read a histogram and use your light meter built into your camera. Other than that, there's not much more you can do, but just be mindful of it when you're taking a photo. Look at it, look at the preview of the photo you just took and say, is that too dark? Is it too bright? The nice thing about digital is if you're not sure if it's underexposed or overexposed, just take a couple images with the settings a little darker and then do it again with the settings a little brighter. And then when you're editing later, you can decide which one you like better. But be mindful of this. Just because you can see your subject doesn't mean it's the correct exposure. Alright, mistake number 3. I am definitely guilty of this one. Over editing your photos. So you just downloaded Photoshop or Lightroom for the first time and you're experimenting with all the different settings. Oh, what's this curves adjustment? What does that do? Oh man, if I drag this clarity slider, it makes my photo so much sharper. But the key to a nice edit is subtlety. So a lot of really common over editing is too much contrast, a really harsh vignette, too much clarity or sharpening in the photo. Remember, just because you can do something to a photo doesn't necessarily mean you should. So be mindful, just do little adjustments, little at a time. One thing I like to do is drag the slider a little too far past where I want it and then bring it back down. But just a nice little experiment is try editing the photo you normally would, and then go back and just bring down all those sliders, you know, maybe 50% from what you set them to, and see if the photo still looks good. Because if your edits are very obvious and it's clear that you adjusted a certain setting, it comes across as very beginner and very unprofessional. So do your best to not over edit your photos. You don't need to do it over the top just because you can. Alright, tip number 4, I think we're at 4. Not organizing your files. Okay, here's the thing. If you want to take a lot of photos, that's awesome. Now, the thing that comes with a lot of photos is a lot of files. This goes for video too, by the way. If you're shooting every day or every week, you are creating tons and tons of files. You need a system. You need to create your own file management system that organizes the files in a way that makes sense to you and that you can keep track of. Whether that means organizing your shoots by the date they were, a certain name you give them, separating your RAW and JPEG files and your edited and unedited files. Whatever you have to do, it might take a while to figure out what file system works for you and how you manage your files. But whatever you do, don't just dump every single photo in one file or just keep everything on your SD card all the time. Years down the road, when you're trying to go back and find a specific file or a specific photo, you're going to thank yourself that you kept everything organized. And especially if you get to a point where you're working professionally and you have multiple shoots on the go, well, it's a lot easier to find which photos you're looking for which particular client if you have them separated properly. Trust me, staying organized is just going to save you so much time and so many headaches. That doesn't even just go for photography, that goes for anything computer related. Any hobby or career where you're creating a lot of files, it's just a smart idea to start now, start organizing them, or you'll regret it later. And the final mistake is not knowing what your controls do on your camera or how to work your editing software. Now I know that's not really a mistake, and it's more something that just comes with using your equipment and using your software. But take some time, take an afternoon or a weekend, sit down with your camera manual and just figure out what every little button does. Maybe there's one in the corner that you don't know what it does and you just don't touch it because I don't want to mess anything up. Go ahead, just sit down. You have your manual, you can find it online, and just learn how your camera works and everything that it does. Because once you're familiar and fluent with all of the controls on your camera, it's going to make shooting a lot easier. Because the less time you spend fumbling around with buttons on your camera, the more shooting you can do. Same goes for editing. Learn how to properly import and manage your files and what all the editing sliders do and the shortcuts. Because once you learn those things, it'll save you so much time just knowing that, rather than trying to figure out how it works every single time. Even if you don't have a project on the go, just open up, say, Lightroom, for example, and just go through all the settings. Watch some tutorials on just the basic functions of Lightroom, because there are so many hidden features in Adobe software and pretty much any editing software that you probably didn't even know about. Like, I still learn new stuff about Photoshop and Lightroom all the time. And even if you sit down for a couple hours and learn one new really helpful thing, that over time, that new thing you learned, that new shortcut, whatever it is, will probably save you so much time over the course of all the photos you're shooting. So those are all my tips for you, all my mistakes that I have made and that I'm sure many of you have made as well. Let me know if you agree with me. If there's any photography mistakes that you guys have, put them in the comments down below. I'd love to hear them. But yeah, that's gonna do it for me. All my equipment is linked in the description if you want to check any of it out. And if you enjoyed this video, toss me a like and maybe a subscribe. It really helps me out and means a lot. But that's about it. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.